People often say that money can buy anything. But that afternoon, inside a Walmart in Austin, Texas, a man learned that some things money will never reach. That day was supposed to be just another ordinary day. Inside the vast Walmart, the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the glass windows, casting soft golden streaks across the polished floor. Shopping carts clinked rhythmically through the aisles, mixed with the chatter of families, the laughter of children begging for candy, and the steady beep of the checkout scanners, all blending into the familiar melody of a peaceful southern afternoon. But then, the sound stopped. A middle-aged man in a crisp gray suit stood at the checkout line. His demeanor was calm, composed, almost too refined for a place so ordinary. The cashier took his sleek black American Express card, swiped once, then again, and on the third try, a single word flashed cold and sharp on the screen. Declined. The air froze. The murmurs behind him fell silent. Someone chuckled under their breath. Another whispered. And the cashier, whether out of awkwardness or cruelty, let out a high, cutting laugh that sliced through the quiet. The man said nothing. No excuses, no anger. He simply stood there, eyes lowered, hands tightening slightly. And momentarily, the world's weight seemed to press down on him. Beside him stood a little girl, no older than 8, her blonde hair loosely braided, a worn pink backpack hanging from her shoulders. She clutched his hand tightly, her clear blue eyes filled with a worry she couldn't quite understand. No one knew who they were. No one knew what had just happened. To the crowd, he was just another rich man who'd been publicly humiliated at the checkout line. But to that little girl, he wasn't someone to laugh at. He was just a human being, hurting inside. And no one could have imagined that this single, humiliating moment would spark a story that would go on to change hundreds of lives. It all began with 3 crumpled dollar bills and one small heart brave enough to reach out to a stranger. No one in that Walmart that day knew that the man standing there, head bowed under the weight of so many stares, was David Langford, the billionaire in real estate, a name so powerful that the glass towers of Houston and Dallas seemed to turn toward the sun just to catch his reflection. He was a man who had once stood in the highest boardrooms in America, where a single nod from him could decide the fate of thousands of workers. The press called him the Steel King of Texas, but here, among shelves of vegetables and milk cartons, surrounded by strangers' murmurs, he was just a man with a declined card. No assistants, no bodyguards, no one to speak on his behalf. Only silence, the coldest sound he had ever heard. Sometimes fate doesn't teach us through significant failures, but through a single small moment, a moment when we still think we're in control. No, it wasn't a bank error. It wasn't because his account was empty. It was a lesson, carefully wrapped in humiliation, sent by life itself to bring him back down to earth. Because for far too long, David had lived in skyscrapers, where people looked like tiny dots beneath his gaze. For far too long, he had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at, not with admiration, but with judgment. He had forgotten the eyes of those with only a few dollars in their wallet, but still smiled anyway. He had forgotten that true strength doesn't lie in power, but in kindness. And now, standing in the middle of a crowded supermarket, he was stripped of everything, his fame, his fortune, his status, until all that remained was a man of flesh and bone, bearing the stares and cruel laughter of strangers. "Funny, isn't it?" the cashier blurted out. "Even the rich forget to pay sometimes." The words seemed light, casual, but they pierced David's mind like a blade. Not because of humiliation, but because he suddenly realized he had once spoken to others with that same tone. Something strange stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't known in years, buried beneath contracts, board meetings, and endless ambition. Shame and truth. In the thick silence that followed, as the echoes of mocking laughter faded into uneasy glances, a small, clear voice rose from somewhere in the crowd. "It's okay. I can help him pay." Everyone turned. The voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to still the entire supermarket. A little blonde girl, Ellie Parker, no more than 8 years old, was slowly walking toward the checkout counter. On her shoulder hung a faded pink backpack with frayed straps, and in her small hands she held a tiny wallet printed with a cat, the kind of wallet only a child would carry. Ellie opened it. Inside were just a few crumpled bills and some tarnished silver coins. That was all she had. Money she'd saved from small rewards her mother gave her, coins she'd found under the couch cushions, and little bits she'd tucked away in her piggy bank to buy a Christmas toy. With trembling hands, she placed them gently on the counter. Her voice was soft, but her eyes, they shone with something pure and unwavering. "Please," she whispered. "He looks like he needs help." A wave of emotion rippled silently through the room. The air conditioner still hummed above, but now everyone could hear each other breathe. No one dared to speak. No one laughed. No one smirked anymore. The cashier, the same one who had laughed moments earlier, froze, her eyes glistening. A man behind the line bowed his head. A young mother tightened her hold on her child's hand. And somehow, the entire room felt clean again. David Langford stood still, staring at the little girl in disbelief. And suddenly, something inside him broke. In that moment, the man who had once signed million-dollar checks wanted to kneel before 3 wrinkled bills from a child's trembling hands. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from shame, but from something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Humility. He bent down, his voice trembling. "Sweetheart, why would you do that for me?" Ellie shrugged lightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Simple, honest, pure. "Because that's what kind people do." That one line, so small, so gentle, cut through every layer of glass and steel around his heart. For a few seconds, the world stood still. There were no billionaires, no social divides, no power, only a man being taught by a child what it truly means to be human. Sometimes, the Walde said that time, the atmosphere in the store changed. The cold air of judgment melted into the warmth of empathy. People looked at each other differently. No more laughter, no more sneers. A few quietly reached for their wallets, placing bills on the counter just to add a little more for the girl, though no one said a word. And David, he simply stood there, his trembling hands covering his face as his tears fell, mixing with the tiny silver coins and the crumpled dollar bills lying before him. As little Ellie shyly tucked her tiny wallet back into her backpack, and as the judgmental gazes around the supermarket faded into silence, David Langford bent down, his voice trembling as he managed to whisper words of gratitude that even he wasn't sure his heart could hold steady anymore. "Thank you, little one. You have no idea what you just did." The girl smiled, pure, innocent, unaware of why this man's eyes glistened with emotion. To her, helping someone wasn't heroic. It was simply the right thing to do. Then she turned, took her mother's hand, and walked away, bathed in the soft amber glow of the setting sun streaming through the glass doors. David stood still. For the first time, he felt small in a world he once thought he owned. That afternoon, he didn't return to the sleek black limousine waiting outside. He didn't return to the marble lobby where employees stood in neat lines to greet him. He simply walked, alone, down a narrow street leading toward a quiet, worn-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Austin, following the slight, fading silhouette of the little girl in the purple shirt and her mother. Their home left him speechless. The paint was peeling. The porch leaned to one side. The wooden door barely closed. Inside, her mother, Sarah Parker, is around 30, was folding clothes and stirring a pot of soup on an old stove. When she saw him standing at the door, she startled for a moment, then offered a gentle smile. "You're Ellie's friend, aren't you? Please, come in. We don't have much, but if you don't mind, you're welcome to stay for dinner." Her voice was warm, sincere, so genuine that David didn't know how to respond. No questions about who he was, no curiosity, no judgment, just kindness, the simple, quiet kind he had long forgotten somewhere between champagne toasts and gala dinners. He sat down on a creaky wooden chair. On the table were 2 old porcelain bowls, a few slices of bread, and a steaming pot of vegetable soup. A meal so simple, it was beautiful. Ellie cheerfully ladled soup into his bowl. Watching those small, earnest hands, David felt something twist painfully in his chest. This little girl had given him everything she had, and now she smiled as though it had cost her nothing. "Kindness doesn't cost much," Sarah said softly. "But for some people, it's the hardest thing to give." Her words caught in his throat. He had spent a lifetime buying loyalty, respect, reputation, but he had never given anything without expecting something in return. That night, back in his luxury hotel suite, David was silent, staring at the white ceiling reflecting the city lights beyond his window. But inside him there was only darkness. The little girl's laughter, her mother's gentle smile, and those 3 crumpled bills that kept replaying in his mind like 3 mirrors reflecting the truth he had long avoided. A man rich in wealth, but empty inside. He realized he had built an empire, but lost his own heart. "I used to think wealth made me different," he whispered, "but tonight, in that little house, I've never felt poorer." Tears welled quietly at the corners of his eyes, and in the still darkness of that penthouse room, something inside him, for the first time in decades, broke just enough to begin healing. Hi. The following week, American media outlets erupted with headlines. From Houston to New York, front pages all carried the same story. Billionaire David Langford announces new foundation for struggling families. But behind the glossy headlines and impressive numbers, no one knew the truth. That the inspiration came from an 8-year-old girl in a faded purple shirt and 3 crumpled dollar bills. David didn't just write a check to ease his conscience. He started over. Day by day, he began to visit small grocery stores, quietly paying off bills for single mothers, slipping cash-filled envelopes beside checkout counters with no name attached. He joined volunteer groups, traveling to poor neighborhoods across Texas, repairing leaking roofs with his own hands, fixing cracked windows, delivering dinner to families who had nothing. Each time he helped someone, he saw her face again, the bright eyes, the trembling hands, offering what little she had. And in those moments, he knew he was coming back to life, piece by piece. People said David Langford had changed. He was no longer the cold man in the skyscraper shadows, but someone who now walks the same ground as the people he once passed without seeing. "I used to think I built cities," he said softly one day, "but now I know. I'm just learning how to rebuild my heart." From the Langford Foundation, small acts of kindness began to spread like light. Hundreds of grocery bills paid anonymously across the state. Old homes repaired and restored. The first scholarships awarded under the name the Ellie Grant, Small Hands, Big Hearts, given to underprivileged children throughout Texas. And at the center of it all was Ellie Parker. Not as a symbol to be displayed, but as a light he followed each day. David made sure that Ellie and her mother Sarah never had to worry about life again. But he did it quietly, because he had learned that genuine kindness doesn't need applause. It only needs to continue. One autumn afternoon, as he visited their home, Ellie looked up at him and asked, "People say you help a lot of others. Do you do it to feel happy?" David smiled. His voice was soft, roughened by emotion. "No, Ellie. I do it to be worthy of your kindness." The little girl smiled back, then wrapped her small arms around him. A child's embrace, but warm enough to melt a heart that had once been made of steel. Years have passed since the day that the black card was declined at Walmart's checkout line. The world kept spinning. Cities grew taller, skylines brighter. However, the name David Langford was no longer spoken in connection with billion-dollar deals. It was remembered for that day, the day a child dared to reach out, and a man learned how to bow his head. On the walls of the Langford Foundation, amid hundreds of framed photos of families helped and homes rebuilt, one picture hung alone in a simple wooden frame. A smiling little girl in a purple shirt, standing beside the man who once broke down before the word declined. David still came to the office every day, but it was no longer a place of meetings and profits. It was where he sat quietly, listening to the stories of ordinary people, the kind of people he had once walked past without noticing. And whenever someone asked him about the origin of his foundation, he would smile and say softly, "It started with 3 crumpled bills and a heart too big for age." La mutte, bắt đầu từ 3 tờ tiền nhau và một trái tim quá lớn so với tuổi của nó. One winter's day, when Ellie had grown up, he invited her to the scholarship ceremony, which bore her name. As they stepped onto the stage, David held her hand gently and spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion, before hundreds of people. "People once remembered me for the buildings I built. But if there's one thing I hope to leave behind in this world, it's the lesson I learned today from the little girl beside me." The entire room rose in applause. But David didn't look toward the crowd. He looked only at Ellie, the girl who once helped him with the last few dollars she had, and who now helped others with everything she had become. He smiled and continued, "True wealth isn't what fills your bank. It's what fills your heart. Giàu có thật sự không nằm trong tài khoản của bạn, mà trong trái tim bạn để lại cho thế giới này." That line was quoted across newspapers and broadcasts nationwide, not because he was a billionaire, but because people saw themselves in that story. A story where even the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. "If this story touched your heart," he said in closing, "share it, because someone out there might need to hear it today." And as the screen faded to black, his final words echoed softly. "Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, so together we can keep telling small stories that carry great meaning." Deep life tales, stories that touch the heart.